corporations have not been paying their fair share of property taxes, leaving California schools schools with overcrowded classrooms and without adequate counselors, librarians, and nurses. California has slid to 41st in the nation in per pupil spending, putting a severe strain on students, families, and teachers in our K-12 schools and community colleges. At the same time, California's local governments are chronically underfunded, which has hurt the quality of local services, including emergency responders, infrastructure repair, parks, libraries, and other vital programs. So what's the problem? 40 years ago, Californians passed Prop 13 in reaction to rapidly rising property taxes. It helped homeowners, but the biggest winners have been large commercial property owners. Under Prop 13, property is only reassessed when it changes hands. For residential property, that occurs on average every 10 years. Commercial properties, especially those owned by big companies, including Chevron, Walmart, McDonald's, and Disneyland, mostly avoid this reassessment. This happens because the properties don't change hands or because owners employ a variety of loopholes to mask title changes. The Schools and Community First initiative requires periodic reassessment of commercial and industrial property, ensuring that this property is taxed at fair market value. It closes commercial property tax loopholes and thereby reclaiming lost revenue. Despite some negative messages you might hear, homeowners and renters will not be affected by this initiative. This can't be said enough. The measure only affects the reassessment of commercial and industrial property. It maintains protections for homeowners and rental residential property, as well as for small businesses in agricultural lands. And finally, Schools and Community First ensures strict accountability so that taxpayer money goes directly to schools and local communities. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Michael, you're up next.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Michael Danubala. I teach at San Jose Middle School. I've been a teacher since 2001. I'm originally from New York. I taught high school in New York for 4 years and been teaching middle school since I moved out here in 2005. I'm here tonight to just comment on the new contract negotiations. Today, I taught my first period class on my prep period. I went and subbed for one of our resource teachers. I taught 2 more classes. At lunch, I run the tobacco use prevention education program. So I had kids in my classroom. We're planning a scavenger hunt for tomorrow. After that, I taught 2 more classes. After school was over, I went to my part-time job. I'm a registered behavior technician. I work with children who have autism. I did that until 6:30, and I do that 4 days a week. And then I came here. When I go home, I'm going to hop on Skype with a student at Branson and go over the edits that I made to his college application essays. So I basically have 3 jobs. And the reason I mention this tonight is because, in contrast, my father was a teacher for 40 years in New York at Catholic schools. And he was able to send all 3 of his children to private schools, Catholic schools, for both elementary and middle and high school. He put an addition on our house, and he was able to do that. And that was a different time. Today, these contract negotiations, it's not just about money. It's about time with my family. I miss them a lot. I'd like to see my kids more. I have 2 children, ages 5 and 3. So just keep that in mind, that these negotiations are not just about money. They're about family too, and time spent with family. Thank you.
Thank you. The final 2 speakers are Megan Sawyer and Tim Block.
Hello, my name is Megan Sawyer, and I'm also a teacher at San Jose Middle School. I attended my first NUSD board meeting on November 5th, and before this, I thought I really had no business being up here making a personal impact statement. But as I listened to other employees sharing their stories about how they are personally impacted by the cost of living in Novato and the NUSD salary, I thought, I am going to come up here and I am going to share my story. So here it goes. Remember the shutdown of 2019? Not the power shutdown, but the government shutdown. This affected my family greatly because my husband is active duty in the U.S. Coast Guard, also known as the only branch of the U.S. government that did not receive a paycheck for the duration of the shutdown. During these 35 long days, I learned two very important lessons. The first is that Novato is a warm and generous community. I was moved to tears many times as I collected donations on base. The outpouring of pure kindness and genuine desire to help us through this uncertain time was heartwarming. I fell in love with this community. It began to feel like home. Until this point, I'd felt like a temporary visitor in the list of cities that I've just lived in because of my husband's military orders. Home was 2,000 miles away in Minnesota, and I was just living in California. That was until this community showed us, these temporary visitors to their community, such kindness. It was during the shutdown my husband and I decided we'd like to stay in Novato for at least a second tour. After all, I love my job. My 6-year-old is learning Spanish at Linwood's dual immersion program, and my now 3-year-old would be able to attend school there as well if we were to stay. The second important lesson I learned during this government shutdown was that we cannot afford to live in Novato after my husband reaches retirement. When my husband received orders for a second tour in the Bay Area, we began house hunting. Yet, after we crunched the numbers, we could see it wasn't going to work. My salary would not support us to own a Novato and allow my husband to enjoy his retirement after 20 years of service and after we need to move out of our military housing. It's a difficult decision to have to choose between growing roots here or moving to an area where my salary and the cost of living are more in balance. This community will be the first place that my 2 young boys will remember. They're old enough now that their first memories of their childhood will be here. We would love to grow roots in this town. We would love for our children to proudly answer Novato, California when they're asked where they're from. After all, not many military children even have an answer to that question. But we cannot afford to make this happen without NUSD aligning the salary with the local cost of living. Thank you.
Thank you.
Go.
You don't want to wear your shirt?
It's part of the thing.
Okay.
All right, my name's Tim Block. Right now, I'm a drama booster president for San Marin High School. I was elected to that, so one of my daughters in the drama department there. And part of the reason I'm talking tonight is that's why I'm here. I'm also here because I'm a parent of that San Marin student, so I'm here as a parent. So when I'm up here, I am talking to you all as a parent. And I get to wear this t-shirt. Super proud to wear this t-shirt because another one of my roles of why I'm up here is I'm a teacher at San Marin. And being a teacher, I am part of the teacher union for everything else going on there, and that's also why I'm up here. I am also on the executive board for that union as the treasurer. So I get to talk to Chris, and I get to talk to Jonathan and Yancey and have that kind of contact. I'm very blessed for that. And I want to make things better for our students. And I think we agree there. Everybody on the school board, all 7 of you, I'm even going to include Chris on that. There we go. We agree on that. That's why I'm here. I want to make it better for all of our students. And I want to thank you because I know being on that board is not easy. You got to show up here twice a month. The benefits are there. I think you're sitting in that chair because you have the same beliefs I do. I want to make that classroom the best place I can, and so do you. I'm seeing head nods all the way across the board. But somewhere between me and somewhere between you, when you're making those choices and you're bringing direction to Chris to make things happen, either at the negotiation table or in my classroom when I'm teaching, or when I hear it from my daughter, from all the other teachers, of support and not support from the district for monies, or from being the drama booster president of monies that I have to go out and solicit things because the district is not supporting the drama department. It really comes down to this. You guys are in charge of a lot of money that you get from the state of California, and you get to decide how to divvy that up. You bring that guidance to Chris, and Chris gets to implement what you guys tell him to do. It is a huge responsibility. I have crazy respect for this man. So when I talk to you about this, and you make those choices, please think of myself and the other teachers. The choices you make a difference in my life, make a difference in their life. It's huge. Huge, I tell you. Things like COLA, cost of living. It's huge. If it's anything less than the national average, I lose money every single year. I can't buy stuff. I'm driving a 22-year-old truck that I have to whittle together every year. Don't have a choice. Anyways, when you're making these choices, please make responsible ones. Think of the teachers. Thank you.
All right, that concludes the public comment. We'll move on to our first staff report this evening. This is our dashboard data, and Amy Carter will be presenting this evening.
Thank you, trustees, for having me tonight. On December 9th, our dashboard data went live, and we're excited to have the opportunity to share this with you and walk you through the results from the state accountability measures for the year 18-19. Just by way of a quick reminder, the state data reporting key is really looking to capture two things. First of all, our results, and also whether and how we improved from the prior year. And in the bottom section, we have what is called the equity report, and it takes our data and breaks it into subcategories and identifies how many of each of our subgroups fell into each color. Red, of course, is low improvement, and blue is really where we want to be. So we're striving to push that needle forward. By way of a reminder, this is our population data for the 2019 school year. We maintained at around 40% of our students are socioeconomically disadvantaged, and about 17% of our students are English language learners, and we serve 0.3% of our population are those foster youth students. So let's start with our first priority area, student achievement in the English language arts category. On the left, you'll see how we performed in 2018, and in this falling in the yellow, with none of our subgroups were in red. In 2019, we remained in the yellow, and two of our subgroups fell into that red category. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. On the right, I'm giving you the California data so that you can compare us. And you can see that at this point from the 18-19 school year, we maintained our achievement levels in English language arts. You can contrast that with the state of California. Then across the state of California, they experienced a 3% increase. So this is something that we're studying, we're unpacking, and looking at this sort of stagnancy that we're seeing here, and talking through solutions and exploring our data. Just by way of a reminder, we're always striving to close that achievement gap, and so I've highlighted for you where our Hispanic students are falling with the green arrow, our socioeconomic disadvantage, that 40% with the blue, falling right in that mean at yellow, and our white students are performing slightly above that at the green. Again, in 2018, we saw none of our subgroups falling into that red category. Here in 2019, we've seen our homeless and students with disabilities falling into that red category. Some similar status with our English language learners maintaining in that orange. And our Hispanic students advanced into the yellow, but our African American students dip down into the orange category. So we're seeing a little bit of movement of our subgroups, and they're an area of focus for us. Moving into math, we're quite proud of the gains that we saw in math. You can see there, last year we were in the yellow, the mid category. This year we advanced to green. And you can see underneath that standard that we increased 6.3 points in mathematics. In contrast, the state came in at maintaining at 2.9 points. So our growth there outpaced the state, and we're proud of that. And that's another area that we're really looking at what was successful last year and how can we continue to see those trends year after year. Again, by way of reminder of our gap, we see our Hispanic students, our English language learners, and our socioeconomic disadvantage coming in at yellow, and our white students achieving at the green level. So we're constantly working to close that gap. In 2018, we saw students with disabilities falling in the red category. They did move out of that category for 2019. However, our African American students, we're now seeing performing in the red in mathematics. English language learners and Hispanic students were an area of concern in 2018, falling in the orange, and we saw them advance out of that category. However, our homeless and our students with disabilities fell into that orange category. Absenteeism, there's two of these priority areas that last year Novato Unified was identified for differentiated assistance. That means we weren't growing, we were falling in those critical areas to the point that the county office came in and were our partners in some analysis of that data and created a plan that ended up in our LCAP revisions last year. But one of the reasons why we found ourselves in differentiated assistance is the students that fell into the red category in 2018. You can say in 2018 for absenteeism, this is chronic absenteeism, we're in the orange. We're proud that we worked our way to the yellow, and most proud that we're not seeing any of our subgroups appear in that red. You can see that the state of California is falling in the orange and lagging behind the growth that we're seeing in Novato Unified, and only experiencing slight increases. Again, our two areas that student groups that we saw in the red last year were African American and homeless students, and they're no longer there in 2019. And we had multiple subgroups falling into the orange category last year. We've moved some of those out, and we remain with areas of concerns around our students with disabilities, English learners, and Hispanic students are in that orange category for chronic absenteeism. Priority 5 is our student engagement priority. This is our graduation rate. In 2018, we were in the yellow, with 90.9%, 90.5% graduating. And this year we had a nice increase of 1.1% and moved into the green for that growth. You can see we're on pace with the state of California that has an 85.9% graduation rate. So we're exceeding the state of California graduation rate. In 2018, we saw none of our subgroups in the red, and we've continued that trend in 2019. In 2018, we saw multiple subgroups, including students with disabilities and our socioeconomic disadvantaged, and Hispanic students were in the red. This year, in 2018, it's only those groups were in the orange. In 2019, it's only our English learners that we're seeing in the orange for the graduation rate. So they remain an area of concern and focus for Novato. Again, we're seeing that graduation rate rise slightly over the 2018-2019 year. And our early trend data for upcoming graduates is quite promising, as we're seeing increasingly more of our freshman students passing their courses, and we're expecting that index to rise. The last priority area is student climate. Again, this is the other area that Novato Unified qualified for differentiated assistance last year, as we had those 2 subgroups in the red. We're proud that we moved this metric so much. We moved from the orange into the green and declined, which is what you want in suspensions. We were able to have those suspensions decline. The state of California falls in the yellow, and you could see there a slightly higher suspension rate for the state of California, 3.4. Nevada's coming in at 3%, and we're hoping to continue to see that decline over the years. The achievement gap here, we have our students, our white students are falling into the yellow, and we're seeing slightly more suspensions taking place for our Hispanic students and our socioeconomic disadvantaged students, along with our foster youth and students with 2 or more races. I'm sorry, I'm reading that wrong. So the area of concern that I want to note is the African American students who were in the red last year and who are in the orange. This is a better slide for that. All right, so again, in 2018, we are identified for the assistance for the African American students and foster students in the red. This year, there are none. And you can see that we've really moved a lot of those subgroups that we saw in 2018 in the orange out of there. However, the African American and homeless students remain an area of concern for suspension rates. This is our suspension rates over time. So we had a 2.6% suspension rate in 2017. That picked up in 2018, and now we're seeing it move more in the right direction, having a 3% overall. Priority number 7 is access to a broad course of study. This is our college and career outcomes. Our college and career index in 2018 put us in the yellow category. We're seeing some nice growth in that, an increase of 3%. We're proud of that. That exceeds the state and puts us in the green category. The state of California is got an average of 44% of students are being registered as college and career prepared, and we are coming in above that at a 50.8%. Our white students and our socioeconomic disadvantaged students are coming in on par in the green category, and slightly behind them we have our Hispanic students and students with disabilities coming in at the yellow. 2018, we had our English language learners and students with disabilities in the red. We were able to advance them out of that category, and so this year we have no students in the red. Our students who fell into the orange in 2018 were our Hispanic socioeconomic disadvantaged students. And again, you're not even seeing a lot of those in the orange, only our English language learners who did advance from the red into the orange for 2019. So we're proud of those efforts, and know a lot of that has to do with our high school counselors and our whole high school team really focusing on this area over last year. There's a new progress indicator. We're so excited. So this is not a slide that I can compare to last year's data because it's brand new. What the state of California is trying to capture is the growth over time. And as long as we have our English language learners on the LPAC exam making growth, they count in the positive for us, and they will count them as a positive index as long as they are advancing each level. So we fell into the 40.7%, making progress towards that English language proficiency. If you take the Novato data and flip back and forth, toggle back and forth between the state, you'll see that they're almost identical. And so we feel like we're at least on par with the state, and it's an index that we're exploring and looking at how we can continue to make sure that we're seeing that growth and development over time. So this is how we're seeing our students break out. So then the bottom, these are EL students who decreased on their LPAC exam, 1 level or more. The mid-range, that 35.7, is students who are maintaining, and that 40% are students who, with that assessment, we're seeing growth in their language acquisition results. So the goal then becomes with our English language learners to constantly see that goal. When we break down all those areas of concern that could qualify us for differentiated assistance, we can qualify both as a district and as a school site. I've provided a slide there for you for the students that we're focused on as a leadership team and a staff, students that we know need extra supports and strategies around making sure that they're advancing in these areas. But the great news is, we did not meet the state criteria for any of the differentiated assistance in 2018 to 19. So that means the state views the Novato Unified School District as one that is making adequate progress over time, and therefore there's not a need for another entity to come in and sort of help us examine those challenges. But they are looking for, over time, that increased growth and development. And just by way of reviewing those slides, you can see that there are areas that we're already having conversations around how we can improve and do better. So that's a nice primer for the work that we're doing in spring. In the spring, we're going to be working on our LCAP. Now that we have the state data, we're sitting down with teacher groups, parent groups, student groups, and evaluating this data and putting into place plans to move those subgroups forward. I've had my first meeting with the Parent Advisory Committee and the DLAC committee last week, and we're going to be unpacking this data and looking at what our stakeholders in our community feel are the most appropriate steps to make sure that Novato is moving forward with these subgroups. We'll be meeting throughout the whole spring and breaking apart our plans, and I'll be eager to share those with you. I also included a quick breakout of our schools so that you know how our schools are performing. We're incredibly proud of Olive, Pleasant Valley, and San Ramon that found themselves in the green and blue in all those areas. Of particular note is Olive. Last year when I presented for Olive, we did have subgroups that were in the orange and red, and they've managed to move all of those subgroups forward, and we're really looking at their success and seeing how we can replicate it. They did have the GATE students come to their campus, but even though that did make an impact that we're cognizant of, the subgroups that weren't involved in GATE also made growth. So there's a lot that we can be learning from in Olive. PV also moved subgroups out of areas of concern and into the green, and San Ramon is doing well. I think as a staff, we're kind of looking at our results in Linwood with some concern. Those aren't what we're really hoping for, but at the same time, we also saw that GATE group move, and we are looking at students who are doing their core contents in both languages. The state of California is releasing an examination. Last year we had the opportunity to pilot it, but they're releasing an examination that offers students the opportunity to take it in English and Spanish. It's still one that they're refining, but our Linwood dual immersion students will at some point be offered the opportunity to present what they know using both those languages. So we're excited for that tool, and we feel like that will give us a more healthy read on the results we're seeing in Linwood. Just by way of a reminder, because Marin Oaks is an alternative ed school, they don't report the EL and mathematics. They're not obliged to report that in the dashboard. But overall, we're sitting down and looking at this data and using it to drive our future actions.
Trustee Gila and then Trustee Gasson.
Yeah. I just wanted to say this is, wonderful. The report's very clear. So thank you for the time. I can tell that it took a long time, but this is very clear. So thank you so much. I'm so proud of some of the improvements that we've made, especially with math. That was a big one. and graduation, and in a lot of these cases were much better than the state. So that's something to be very proud of. So I'm wondering about, I know the charter school has their own system, and so will we, if we wanted to get some information on that and how that's doing, will that be included some time in
Definitely.
the future?
And I
that
think
we
Nikki has plans to do a Novato charter presentation.
Great, just
for
because it
you.
wasn't in here. So, and then, so also along, I know we have, you know, this comparison with California as well, but do we have, if we wanted to come to you later and ask you about nationwide and how we're doing across the nation, so you have some of that information that for the near future?
Absolutely.
Okay, great, thank you. And it's just very good news for this part. I am worried about the ELA, so I'd just like to see some improvement on that. And so I don't know. Also, do you think there's a correlation between that group and absenteeism? And you know, what are we doing with that, especially like, for example, with Linwood?
That's something that we're studying. What research tells us about any new curriculum adoption is that you initially do see an implementation dip. So there is a part of us that sort of expected to have a dip this first year around ELA. So that's kind of right now are the lens that we're viewing it, and we're hopeful in some of our interim data assessment that growth is changing and that we're going to see a much better outcome next year.
Let me just add to that really quick, because that was one of my comments, was the English language arts. And one of my criteria is whenever we're below the state, we don't outpace the state. That is a huge red flag for me. So that's not even because we're in the red, just that alone is concerning to me. So I know you said you're unpacking all that and diving into that. So I'd be curious to see what the outcomes are. Okay. I had Trustee Gasson, and then Trustee Mack, and then Trustee Millerick.
Hi, thanks for the information and going. It's helpful watching you go over it besides just reading it, because I know I asked you some questions, and I think I danced around what I realized is really my question, or what I didn't understand with the data. And it would be, you've got the student population identified into, which is pretty consistent, the socioeconomically disadvantaged, English learners, et cetera. But then when you go into subcategories or subgroups and you talk about how many number of students, student groups in each color, I realized that those don't actually represent student, like a two, is it only two students, or is it representative of something else?
So I can tell you the exact students, and actually if you go on the dashboard and you click on a subgroup, it'll tell you the exact number of students that are in that subgroup.
Because I guess what I'm thinking, so homelessness seems to be an easy thing because that can change. You can't change your ethnicity or some other factors. But if you have a group, and what I'm wondering is in terms of when you're reporting, if you have a change in those groups, it could change how many fall in a different color. And I know we ran into this problem with school site council because the group was so small. If one didn't do well, it pulled everything else down. So I'm just wondering, or for me, a helpful piece of information would be how static are those subgroup numbers, or do they change? Do we, or African American seems to be something else that's moving a little bit. Do we have more or less African American students than we did before? Or I'm just wondering if that plays into some of the movement on the color scheme.
Yes, it doesn't. So a real good example of this is if you look at PV and you look at PV last year, They had a high enough number of students to count as a subgroup, and if you look at PVA this year, those percentages are gone and they're not even counted as subgroups. So PV, I think, is looking at one subgroup in their data. So the state establishes some metrics, and if you hit a threshold of 30 students or more, then you've now considered a subgroup. And if you've fallen below that, then you're not, even though that data, if you have between 11 and 29 students, is still reported, so you can track that.
But so if you have 11 one year and 10, then they're not going to show up. I mean, I'm just thinking I think a lot of this information is helpful. I just see that it could be, are you chiming in here, Chris? Okay.
Anytime you're dealing with averages and a small number, one or two students changing
Right.
dramatically skews the numbers dramatically. So I think you're right. I think it's helpful for us to give you the number of students in those subgroups. But I think we're always going to see more volatility when we're talking about a smaller number.
Okay. Well, and I didn't even know if it, like how small, when we're looking at that. So that's helpful. The other thing was just, in looking at the chronic absenteeism, I was wondering, do you think that I feel like the campaign that we've run is not quite caught up with that, but do you, the Strive for 5 campaign have anything to do with that, do you think, the improvement?
So this is data that was reported last year, but what I can tell you is after it was reported, we sat as an administrative team and started working to impact that immediately in January, tracking data and becoming more cognizant of those subgroups in suspension and chronic absenteeism. And so what I think you're seeing there are some early fruit of our labor, but this year, as you know, we've put into place the differentiated assistance plan, and we're tracking data every month with administrators around chronic absenteeism and suspension, and we're feeling like we're going to hit even better targets for the next school year's reporting.
Trustee Mack?
I have to say, it's great to have some continuity in the reporting, isn't it, for a few years, so we can actually, measure it, because I know for a while there,
The story.
yeah, like 2 or 3 years in a row was like a whole new measure every time. We had nothing to compare to, but this is awesome. It's also very explanatory, self-explanatory to a degree. If you could just jump to slide 20, and this is just me being confused, which happens often. In the no performance color, I'm just confused. I mean, I understand that's normally reserved for the groups that are statistically insignificant to a certain degree, I suppose. But I'm just not understanding why the African American group is included in that. What made them
So
fall
this
off
is
the radar?
for last year's senior class, and we reported 17 African-American students in last year's senior class.
It's just too small.
So it's too small,
Okay.
yeah.
All right, that's surprising. Okay. And kind of touching on what Trustee Butler was talking about ELA and if we're behind the state, and I totally agree with what you're saying. But I'm looking at slide 4, and once again, this is confusion on my part. And I see that we are 6.9 points above the standard, but still in yellow. The state is 3 points below the standard and in green. You might have already explained this, but I missed it. Wait.
So the metrics are always, what's your result and are you making progress? And so because the state made progress,
More
they
progress.
tipped into the green.
Okay.
We stayed stagnant, and that's why we,
Okay.
didn't see that same growth. But I think they have metrics around, as long as you're making progress, they'll keep you in the green. But once you stop making progress or head in the opposite direction, then your metrics start to
Now I understand
go
what
down.
you're saying.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yep.
And so if I get out of the weeds and get more to just a higher level,
Yep.
if you were just to summarize, what's your biggest surprise here? What comes out of this that surprises you most?
I would say that not a lot surprises me because I've seen the hard work of all our educators and our team behind it. I think those subgroups were an area of focus that we just kept hammering on in our college and career, and access to the course of study and curriculum. So I think more than anything, it's just validating that some of these efforts that we've engaged in are making a difference. None of us are complacent about that ELA data, and it's definitely something that we're talking about and examining, and really trying to make sure that next year I tell you a very different story in that subcategory.
Right, got it. And then lastly, just kind of going forward, I'm guessing ELA is the focus. You kind of already said it, but just reiterate that ELA is the focus going forward, you believe?
Yep. I think, it's one of those spinning plates. You got to keep everything
Sure.
moving
Whack-a-mole.
forward. But I think that's one that is going to bear out special attention. And we're also really looking at that nice success in mathematics and really trying to tell a strong story around, what really drove those results. One more thing that I want to make sure the board knows about for next year's assessment is that the state has established a participation rate, and if students don't participate in the CAS test, they no longer just don't count, they now count against us. So I would encourage all of you wonderful trustees, when you're talking to people in the community, that you're really encouraging our students to take those tests and to make a difference, because we did have a low participation rate at some of our schools, Novato High School in particular. And while we rode through this year okay, if that replicates again next year, I'll be here telling you a dire story about Novato High, and it will be simply deriving from those participation
And
rates.
if I could just
So-
touch on that, because I experienced it. There was a very active population at Novato High of students that said, why do I need to take this test? There's nothing in it for them. Not only that, students would show up and take it, they'd just go, check, 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 done. So, and it's somewhat out of our control, because we cannot, I don't know, unless we have some way of rewarding them for taking it, which, obviously that doesn't sound right. But all we can hope for, I guess, is that the UCs dump SAT and ACT and make the CASP the standard, which is what they're talking about. And then it addresses equity, it addresses the CASP, everything. It does, there's no more test prep. So let's just hope that happens sooner rather than later, because that lawsuit's going through.
But we really need to boost that participation rate, or we'll be feeling an impact that will affect Novato property values, and it's a pretty critical
We need
metric.
to talk to the students about it. How do we, the administrators, I'm sure they have great ideas. We need to make sure the students buy into it too. Might need to go all the way down to the leadership teams or whatever.
Trustee Millark, and then Trustee Gila.
Couple of points. Quickly look at slide 4. Thanks. So this is the math, and that's ELA, Student Achievement Priority Math. Go, what is?
There's
Page 4.
on the sheet, and then there's
So this was number 7. I see them. So do 7. Okay, so this shows us in the green. Now go to page 20 to 30. We're getting there.
Slide 30.
Yeah, keep going, you're not there yet. 27, 28, 29, there.
Oh, yeah.
Back one. Yeah, right. It's 29. So in mathematics, which is my focus, in Loma Verde, we're yellow, and in Lou Sutton, we're orange, and then go forward a slide. And in Linwood, we're orange, and Hamilton, we're orange. And so there's 4, so that our success is uneven. Go forward one more slide. And this is the one that concerns me the most. In San Marin, at the high school, in mathematics and at Novato High, we're yellow. So we're making progress, but the progress is uneven at the elementary schools, and it, separate from the earlier slide, it looks like we're falling flat on the mathematics. So we've had the mathematics teams come and present to us before, and they have been proud of the progress that they're making, and I believe that was substantial because they're using some new methods to reach students. But I look at this slide and I'm concerned that we're not beating the state average. which was Debbie's criteria in mathematics, particularly at the high schools. And I'm afraid that these are gatekeepers. So are there like SAT tests that students take in mathematics that allow us to judge our progress against some more universal measure? And how do our students do on those more standardized nationwide tests, and is that a good measure?
Yes, so we do have access to our students' math and SAT scores, and that's something we can disaggregate and prepare something for you to look specifically at.
I care less that I understand this, I'd like to. I care a lot that our mathematics teachers understand it. So
could
I'm
you-
interested in the conversation you have with them.
The challenge with any of the, Trustee Miller?
Well, let me get them to answer questions first.
If I could step in. So if you look at our slide, the center slide, it says we're 10.3 points below the standard. You look at the state slide, it says that they're 33.5 points below the standard.
Right, okay, right.
So we're 20 points above where the state is in math.
That's good.
Yeah.
So this is green, but we showed yellow on a few of our schools.
Yeah, so what
We're
we're
still
seeing.
ahead of the state, that's still
Yeah,
good.
What we're seeing is that inconsistent results, right? So it's some schools are outperforming others at this point, which is somewhat predictable, but those are the kinds of things we're trying to systemize and work out of the system.
And I'm trying to figure out what our plan is to measure that and work with the teams, the math teams who've come here and talked to us about it, about how do you effectively do that, because more and more in the world I live in, the tech sector, you have to have learned these skills. They are gatekeepers to careers.
And I
So-
think we'll be telling you our data tracking story later this
Okay,
evening.
good.
What we've got in store.
Go ahead.
So going along with what he's saying, so my question, and not to, I feel like I'm picking this whole thing apart. I mean, I see a lot of value, but if there's only, what concerns me now, if there's only certain students taking it, that's not even a accurate, I mean, if it could be like 20% of all the kids and the 80% that didn't want to take it are actually really good, and I guess I'm also looking at it.
It wasn't as bad as 20%, for sure.
No, Ross. Opposite. It's the opposite. The smart kids all said, I'm not taking this, I don't. All the AP kids said, I don't take it. Yeah, they all.
Giving them an incentive, and I'm sorry to step in, but giving them incentive to take this, I'm on the site board at Bottom High, and one of the kids said, oh, I don't have time, and another parent said the same to me, and I said, what do you mean you don't have time? This is how we gauge what we need to do and how we become better. And he said, I'm too busy taking 5 AP classes. You could tell, literally, and the parent felt the same way, and I was, my jaw. So how do we incentivize the parents as well as the kids?
I would say the early action acceptances this year, I would say 90% of them either did not take the test or tanked it. They did not care. So yeah, quite the opposite. It was tanked, and basically the only kids taking the test are the kids that are struggling, and that's not right. The other thing too, if we use a standardized SAT or whatever else, we can't do that because that is economically biased, if you will. The kids who take, they pay for test prep, all that stuff, they get the good scores, the kids just go in and take it. They don't.
Your way through college doing test prep for other kids.
Understood,
Okay.
but the kids that don't have those resources, they don't get that benefit.
They don't.
And it does not reflect what we're doing at all. It reflects with how much money is being spent on test prep.
So this is exactly the conversation I'd like to hear how you're dealing with these biases built into this.
All right, so you. Yeah. So we have trustee Aguila, and then I have trustee Cooper, and I have 2 comment cards, so.
So I just want to go back to participation for the test for next year. And so is there a plan that, I know Trustee Mack touched it a little bit. But do you already have a plan to do outreach to the parents and the teachers?
Yes, and Nevada High has even changed their entire test administration schedule to accommodate those AP students. And we're really sending the campaign that our educators give you our very best every single day, and we're just asking for this gift in return from our juniors and asking them to step in and take that test seriously.
Like maybe the PTAs and like the parent manual and announce it and
Yep, there's a whole
English-
campaign we're putting
English
together
and
for
Spanish
parents.
and
Yes.
Chinese and whatever.
Get the word out.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great. Okay, so that's one question. And then the next question, so now after Trustee Miller's comment regarding the math, now I'm confused. And I don't want to go too much into it again, but so in one, and you touched it a little bit, but in one, I'm confused because in one slide you said that we were that shows that we're ahead of the state, and you explained it a little bit, but can
Absolutely.
And then on the
So a
other
good
hand-
talking point to really sum it up is Novato Unified School District exceeds the state
Okay.
on every single dashboard metric.
Yeah.
Where we exceeded the state growth, we doubled it in mathematics, we flatlined in English, and the state went up 3%. That said, our students are still outperforming the state expectations, but that's a trend that we do not want to see continue.
Okay, thank you. Just because I got confused. So thank you so much. That needs to be clear.
Trustee Cooper.
Thank you, Amy. I appreciate this. You know, I think this is a really powerful tool, and I think you would agree with that. It's kind of quirky. If you look at page 5, or can you go back in there? It's interesting to note how no, not that one. I'm sorry, 10. No,
Slide.
it's page 5 at the bottom of the
What's the slide number?
10.
Slide 10.
But that's, sorry, go down one more, 9. Sorry, we're so confused here.
You had 20 minutes to prepare.
I know, right? So it's really interesting to me. So in 2018, students with disabilities in red, and then that just flip-flops, and now it's African American. I wonder how you could identify what did you do, what did we do to make that happen? Because, like, maybe it's a change in population too, could be, but that's kind of it's like, how do you do that? What did you do?
Yep, and that's
So we can
really,
replicate it.
yep, we're trying to leverage our data cycles to find these best practices. I think really we're all kind of looking at Olive. I think what they did there is really extraordinary, and they're sharing with us a lot of their database strategies. So, you know, we're now at the point that now that we have this index, we're trolling for those successful strategies to make sure that they're now replicated at other school sites. So.
Yeah, good. And I am very interested, you mentioned the Spanish-English test at Linwood. I think that'll be kind of really helpful and with what we have going on with the dual immersion.
Yep.
So, because if you look at, this, I don't know what page it is, whatever, but their performance is going down and down and down for the last 3 years, so,
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah, and we're hoping that that will give us a more authentic read of the good work that's been happening there. Research does tell us that those dual immersion programs do suffer from an academic dip, but that it's made up for those students by that 5th grade level. So we're hoping that that trend bears out at Linwood.
Yeah.
But the state is also hopefully going to accommodate us with a metric that helps us tell the story of what their mastery levels truly are and the content, rather than having that confused with language acquisition.
Yeah, and clearly the transition with Gate leaving, I'm sure that has a lot to do with it as well, or something to do with it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Trustee Gasson?
Just because we've touched on a lot of these subgroups and stuff, can we officially get a list of the last couple of years of how many homeless and students with disabilities, and just so that we kind of know what numbers we're working with and how they might have changed over the years?
Yep, I'll
Thank
send
you.
that to you.
I appreciate it.
All right, we have 2 comment cards, so we'll do those. Mariah Fisher and Karen McCormish.
Good evening. I want to address the data in 3 specific categories. The first is with the students with disabilities. I've been up here before. My son qualifies in that category, and I expect him to be in the red or orange yet again. He's getting an A in Spanish, though, so he's happy. But the sacrifice is things like this, where he's not getting the support he needs to help with moving our rainbow out of the hot spectrum. And, it's what I need to do for his mental health and for his wellness. But it saddens me because he's also one of the smartest people I've ever met in my life. So the other part, in addition to him not being able to receive support in order to take an elective, is the exploding caseloads of these teachers. We are above the state mandate for our resource teachers, and we still are there. I've been yelling about it since August. They have not received waivers. They have not been asked. I know. I get that you're concerned, that maybe you question that, but trust me, they have not received the waivers that they are supposed to receive if they are above the caseload that California Department of Education mandates. So, but they've been over for years and they've never received it. So when we talk about allocation of funds, this would directly impact these students if we look at making those caseloads smaller and giving these students access to the resources they need. The second is when you look at how when it's broken down into the schools, it's no surprise that the schools that have a higher population of English learners are suffering, they're struggling. And, being a parent from Loma Verde, I would love to see some sort of mandate that says 3rd through 5th grade at a Title I school does not have combos, period. We need that to happen. It's so hard to be teaching 3rd and 4th or 4th and 5th to prep for a test when you're dealing with such a diverse pool of students. The third issue is math. We have multiple high school math teachers above the 155. They're getting paid. We have an exhibit K salary, that they get to be compensated for that overage, but the teachers are struggling. They don't want it. Granted, maybe some of them are really appreciating it with Christmas in 2 weeks, but they recognize that it's so hard to be in a class of 35, 36, 37 students. And San Marin is seeing an increase in diversity. And I have heard from one math teacher that she is struggling and she has reached out for support and is hearing crickets. So these issues are very, very real for us. And so it's much more than salary that we're really fighting for. Thank you.
Yeah, Karen. I was like, well, where is she?
Hi, I'm Karen McCormish, a 5th grade teacher at Loma Verde. The previous 2 years, I was a 3-4 and a 4-5. I'm data driven. I look at the CASP and the test scores and the interims, and actually I didn't have access to the interims for all of last year. Even though I was at a Title I school where other non-Title I schools did have access to the CASP interims before it was time to take the actual test, which frustrated me like crazy. I do have access to the interims now. 75% of the Title I schools have split grade levels in Novato. 3 out of 4 have split, 1 or more split grade levels at the schools. 25% of the non-Title I schools have split grade levels. That's disgusting. Sorry. It's horrible. It's really bad. If you look at the colorful charts up there, some of the discrepancies you're going to see are in the Title I schools. The Title I schools are having a hard time getting to the green because we have 30 kids per class or higher class sizes than the non-Title I schools. I don't know how many ways to say that, but it's a fact. And if you're saying empower, then you have to give me the same situation as other teachers at other schools have. Same opportunity, because the opportunity for me to teach is the opportunity for the kids to learn. So let's make a better plan for next year. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, bring it back to the board. Trustee Millark. And then we would like to move on with this.
Sure. I'm interested in having Chris confirm the split school, or Amy confirm that. Karen's comments it's an interesting piece of data that I'd like to be able to look at a little bit deeper. Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks.
Okay.
Thank you.
And maybe I just need to dive in online and do this, but it might be helpful if we have this, and it's effectively by topic, right, breakout. If we could flip it and have it by group. So I would like to see across the board students with disabilities, all the different colors. I mean, I can infer it here, but kind of just see all the red and orange. And that tells me, it just helps to understand how each group's doing across the board, as opposed to kind of putting it together.
Yep. And I think I would be remiss to not point out that our students with disabilities increased in 4 of our subcategories, that we saw an increase of 6 points in math. We saw their graduation rate go from 75 to 87%. We saw students with disabilities, college and career, they had 5.1%, and this year 16.7%. So we are seeing some great growth from those great students and our hardworking educators. And then we also had our SPED evaluation in the spring of last year, and we are putting those recommendations into place, and we're hoping that those will bring some impact to the data that we'll see next year.
Right, so it sounds like flipping this to show it by group, the growth in each group, and areas of concern would be really helpful.
Perfect.
So
Trustee Miller?
I want to thank you for the presentation. There's questions, but not criticism of the work of collecting data and measuring as accurately as we can the programs we're running. That in and of itself is an extremely critical piece for us to get better. And thank you for the presentation. So the questions are not meant to be critical of any of this work. It's the work that we have to do, and we'll do it collectively from the classroom to the sitting here at this table. And
I welcome it. I think if we're not critical and self-reflective about this
Yeah.
data, then
Then
we've
some
really
kid doesn't-
lost an
yeah.
opportunity.
Some
So
kid doesn't get what they're deserved.
these are the right questions to ask, and I thank you.
And
Education at this table.
yeah,
And a lot of other
I'm
things.
right there with you.
Amen.
And I think data is collected on a daily basis with our teachers. They are constantly looking at it. This is not the only blueprint that they look at. So, and I respect that. So, thank you for the report. It done very well, and it was presented really well. So, thank you. Moving on to 14B. This is the student retention data. Leslie Benjamin will present this. If you recall, our last board meeting, we had a staff, same report related to staff.
Good evening. I'm here to give you a report on our student retention data, or a survey of families of students who have left the district, and we've been doing this survey for the past 5 years. This year, we had about 315 students that didn't continue with NUSD, which is down from last year. And we sent out 275 emails, so I get the data from our IT department, the list of families and their email addresses, and then I email them directly a survey link. And we had 107 responses, which represent nearly 40% response rate, which is on par with what we've had in previous years. And in And what's been in the past few years is about 35% of now these are the families who have answered the survey. So that's of 107 families. 35% have moved out of the area. 52 students were from the elementary level, and that was continuing a downward trend. We've seen sort of a decrease in those elementary students that are leaving. 86 students from the secondary have left the district, and that's up from 72 in 2018. That's primarily from the high school level. However, that did not affect the enrollment this year because we're still at or above enrollment projections. So even though we lost students, it didn't affect enrollment. In 8th grade, of these 107 surveys that were returned, 33 students did not continue on to high school, and that continues to be an area of concern for NUSD, is looking why aren't they continuing into high school. And then following the 8th grade, we have 10th grade, 4th grade, and 5th, 7th, and 9th grade, which were the bigger groups of students who did not continue with our school system. So where did they go? Well, Good Shepherd had, for those respondents that identified what school they went to, 5 said Good Shepherd, 2 said Mark's Day School, Our Lady of Loretto, which was down from 6 from last year, and Other Marin Public Schools, which is 2, which was down from 6 in 2018. And as if you recall, a few years ago, we had quite a few students go to Petaluma City Schools, but didn't have that was not reflected in the data this year. So sort of a decrease there. So in secondary, we saw an increase at Sonoma Academy, and in reading through some of the comments, it sounds like that might have been a result of the discontinuation of the NBI program, where they wanted something different, so they went there. Marin Catholic, we know we lose some kids to Marin Catholic, and some of them indicated that it was because of athletics. And again, the Credo High School, and that's primarily from our Novato charter school students who want to continue in that type of education. And why did they go? Well, outside of having that the families moved, the top reason was a lack of challenging curriculum, attending private school, the number of students, and I interpret that to mean maybe the number of students in the classroom, possibly, and then the teaching staff. And so what are we doing? So with the loss of the 8th graders to other schools, we have been improving our outreach by the high school administrators and the program leads with the middle schools. We're also at Hamilton, they've implemented a full-time transition support person to ensure that there's a smooth transition of 8th grade students into the high school. And to address the curriculum, I've talked with Ed Services and Education Services, and they're developing the PBE, the Performance-Based Education Model, to ensure consistently rigorous and engaging curriculum, continue to develop and strengthen the pathways at both the high school. We have the STEM and the academies at San Marin, and the MSA and the medical pathways at Novato High. And we're going to be this next spring, we're going to be doing the Youth Truth Survey in January, so that'll be our 3rd year, and we'll continue to analyze and compare the results on our student engagement and rigor from prior years. Thank you.
Trustee Gass and then Trustee Cooper.
Thanks for the information. And actually, as I was listening to you, you made me realize something, that I had been at the Hamilton school site and talking to the principal there. And one of the things he had mentioned, we were just talking about the students and, you know, how things went from doing K through 8 or TK through 8. And he did mention at the time about the challenge of kids going all the way over to Novato High because of transportation and stuff. And I think he also mentioned the person you indicated on here. Is there in the numbers and stuff when we're looking at that, is that a significant, is that where we're losing a lot of the transitional kids?
That's a great question. I'd have to dig into it and look at it to see where those schools are that those kids, of the people that identified, where they were going, if that was Hamilton or if it was another school.
Okay. I mean, because you could even just do that from without the data, but that...
Well, actually, hold on. Let's see.
Or I just meant like even, you could probably even take the people who didn't respond, that might be, I don't know, it was just something I hadn't even thought about it, but he even mentioned that they have some kind of transportation thing that they do to help the kids out and, going across the freeway and, you're not driving yet at 8th grade, but.
Let me look into that.
Okay, thank you.
Trustee Cooper, and then trustee Aguila.
Thank you. Very good, good information. I think part of the success, I think we've identified the 8th grade transition from the 8th grade to 9th grade, getting to, to high school. I think that San Marin does a really good job of that incoming freshman orientation. And hopefully we keep focusing in on that. I think that's really important to get the message out. And I'd like to make sure in some of the comments, some they want to go to private school or for various reasons, they have religious reasons or whatever. But I think there were a lot of comments, vaping, emotional support, bullying, lack of challenging curriculum. Those are some of the things that we can work on. So, and I know we are.
Yeah, this year
Those things, the others
yes.
we can't really, I'm sorry.
I was going to say, I know this year that that in the LCAP there is more funding for counselors, emotional counselors, and also as well as we've had that DOJ grant with the to address the vaping. And not all of that has been implemented, but I know it's in the process, and so we have started that. So I'm wondering if we might see different results next year with people, depending on what it is. But we do have some efforts going, addressing those.
It's great. Thank you.
Trustee Aguila, and trustee Mack.
Thank you. Thank you for this information. So glad that we have it. I'm wondering about following up. So here we have the data, and then and like I don't have the questionnaire in front of me, and so it's hard to tell. Do they have a choice after okay, so I left because of. You talk about lack of challenging curriculum, and so they check that off, and so then what? So do we, is there a space for them to say what about home teaching?
Yes. So there is a list of things that a respondent can choose, and then there's an other if the reason doesn't fall under that, and then at the very end there's another comment area.
I don't see like home teaching. Is anybody mentioning
there was
that?
Just maybe one or two that mentioned homeschooling.
Homeschooling, okay, and then I have a question about teaching staff. And you say 16, and so what do they mean by that?
Truthfully, I don't know because I don't have anything else that says anything about that. I just kind of put some, based on past comments, we put out a list of choices, and so I just put teaching staff, and so that could mean a number of things.
So again, with following up, would there be maybe in the future, could we do an explanation where they can write down what, just because I think that's important to just for us to know. So anyway, thank you so much for this.
You're welcome.
It's a lot of work, so thank you.
Trustee Mack.
Thank you, Leslie. Good stuff. As you know, we've evolved on this, and it's gotten really good. It's good stuff. You're going through slide 7, talking about the pilot for the full-time transition support between Hamilton and, getting into high school. It got me thinking a little bit because in my mind, this issue of out-migration, if you will, from our district typically is socio-economically biased towards people of means. And so I was kind of thinking, the pilot program, while I think it's good, it might not be targeted at the folks that are more likely to leave, is what I'm getting at. I'll leave that to you guys to decide, but what it made me think of is there a way that maybe at the beginning of this survey you can get people to categorize themselves, or maybe we already know I don't know It's random, right? I'm sorry, not random. It's anonymous, right? So you really don't know anything about them. You don't know.
Right, I do have, I think, an ethnicity question at the end.
Okay. It's just what I'm getting at is if we could somehow understand where they fall into on the groups and the LCAP, it really help us to understand, okay, so this part of the LCAP is bleeding off due to all these reasons. That impacts us, especially in secondary, especially in high school, because all these kids that of strong economics are doing great, and then they leave, and then kind of, it impacts what we have in our performance overall. Kind of goes to what we're talking about, Title I schools versus non-Title I schools. So I think it'd help us understand a little bit more about the impact it shows on our LCAP, but also understand what's driving these folks. I think, makes sense?
Yes,
Okay,
it does.
thank you.
All right, I have one question, or just curious. A student that we expel basically does not part of our district anymore, and we have to readmit them as a student back into our district. Are they considered in this at all? Does this survey go to them at all?
I don't believe so.
Okay.
Well,
There's a couple people who replied Marine Community School, which
right,
is
there
like,
was one person that did that. So actually, if they were enrolled in our school last year and not enrolled this year.
right?
they would
We
probably fall
expelled
into
them
this.
for the remainder of the, or for all of next school year.
Right.
Yeah, I'm
So
curious.
that's,
Just something
a
to think.
few.
This is a thought.
Yeah.
It's not very many. Okay. Thank you for bringing this every year to us. It's
welcome.
valuable information, and we appreciate it. Thank you. All right, moving on to our final staff report. It's the school size committee update, and Superintendent Koska will be presenting his report.
All right, so I've been asked to do some follow-up work on the recommendations of the school size committee, and then to make a recommendation to you in regards to where we are on that topic. So I'll start with just bringing back the findings of the school size committee, which operated during last school year. They concluded the committee work in February of 2019. And they made some findings. And the findings essentially were that the size of our elementary schools, they believed, had a positive impact on the instructional programs and school cultures at our elementary schools. They also found that we're not maximizing our facilities capacity and are therefore not operating in the most effective manner possible. So given all that information, the recommendation of the committee was, specifically in regards to school closure, was that the positive impacts of the instructional program and school culture outweighed the negative impacts on facility capacity and operational efficiency, and therefore the committee did not recommend closing an elementary school at that time. So those were the findings and recommendations of the team. They also made some other recommendations that were a little bit aside from school closure. And these were typically ways that they felt like the district could find other efficiencies or other revenue generating sources. So here are some that I called the key. There were some that got a little bit less attention, but these were the key recommendations that came forward. One was to market the benefits of our local schools to our community, including our specialized programs. Expanding Saturday academies for attendance recovery, expanding our dual enrollment partnership with the College of Marin and or Santa Rosa Junior College. They recommended that we go out early for parcel tax increase and increase the dollar amount per parcel and also include an escalation factor, and at that time they recommended a 4% increase annually. They recommended that we change our open enrollment dates and that we accept more transfers from outside of the district. They asked that we consider, are we using the district office in the best way possible? Could we move over to the Hill space and then lease out this property? They also encouraged us to look at the way we use our district facilities and the way we rent out that space. and that we reduce or eliminate consultant contracts. So those were recommendations from that committee. So I want to follow up on the actions that we've taken since February of 2019 in regards to their recommendations. We did sign a contract last year with Target River to do some marketing work with us. In particular, our goal was to capture a higher percentage of the students that were living in Novato than we were previously capturing. There was an effect. It's hard to say if the effect was a direct result of the work with Target River, but what we can say is that our district-wide enrollment increased by about 60 students from year over year. But more than that, we expected a decline of about 90 students. So that means we have about 150 students more than we anticipated having. And I think that Target River had some impact on that, and probably some significant impact. The second suggestion was to expand Saturday academies. We attempted to do that. We found that we were struggling with the company that we were working with to support us with Saturday academies. And so in line with one of the other recommendations, we've eliminated that contract with that consultant, and we're doing that work ourselves. We're a little, as a result of that change, a little slow getting it off the ground, but we think that we will find our feet and it'll be a more productive program for us moving forward. In regards to our partnership and dual enrollment with College of Marin and Santa Rosa Junior College, we found that College of Marin is a better community partner for us just because they're our local partner, and we have increased that partnership and continue to work with them on ways that we can expand their services. And actually, Jonathan Eldridge was here just last meeting to talk with you about some of those changes that we put into place. One key recommendation was to go out for the parcel tax. And as you trustees are all very well aware, at our last meeting, you approved us going out for a parcel tax that increased the tax per parcel from $251 to $376 per parcel. And based on guidance from the people that are supporting us with the parcel tax, we agreed that 3% was probably the sweet spot on the parcel tax. And so if approved by 66.7% of the voters, the new parcel tax would replace the old parcel tax and would be in place for 8 years. Further, regarding open enrollment, we have moved up our open enrollment date to allow people to transfer earlier. One of the upsides of that is that this will allow us to inform people requesting transfers of the status of their transfers earlier, and will take away some of the conflict that they experience when they have to make a decision about what schools they're going to go to. They're going to have information from us in a timely way that'll hopefully let them choose us early. We looked at the district office, and we brought a couple of reports to you. The first report was in regards to the Hill space. And what we demonstrated to you in that analysis of the use at Hill was that campus is pretty much at capacity by Marin Oaks, by Nova, by some county special day class programs that are out there, by our IT department, by School Fuel, by a number of other partners that are by adult education, and some other things that are using that space. So there is not a significant chunk of space that we could move the district office over there into. We followed that up with a report to you from a commercial real estate agent who looked at this building as a viable facility for rent. And what they found is that since this building is built for a single user, and because this would be a Class B property based on the parking availability and a couple of other things. Then they looked at the availability of Class B rental space in the city of Novato and found that it is highly unlikely we'd be able to find somebody to lease this building from us. So that was not a very viable option, unfortunately. The last two, we were to look at the rental options across the district and loosen restrictions for facilities rentals. And just to be honest with you, with some of the transitions we've had in our maintenance departments, that's just not something that we've been able to address. We will continue to work on that in the near future now that we've got our team together. That's also going to be more and more important as we have some of these new facilities come online, particularly the performing arts centers. We're going to need to be really thoughtful about how we manage prioritizing student use, but also allowing rental use of those facilities. And then the final recommendation was to eliminate consultant contracts. And so as you went through the budget reduction process for this 2019-20 school year last spring, you took action to reduce or eliminate many of those consultant contracts. And we'll continue to review that as we go into the budget development for 2020-21. Whew. It's a lot of 20s. So where do we go from here? We just did an analysis of our month 4 enrollment, and the great news is those students that showed up early in the school year continue to attend our schools. Our TKK class, we lump those together often, is 627 students. In each of the past 2 years, that number was 550. That's a big positive change that we like to see, an increase of about 75 students. So our big question is this an anomaly or is this a trend? And based on 1 year of data, we can't say if this is an anomaly or if this is a trend. If it were to be a trend and we were to capture 75 more students each year in our TKK class, that means that over the lifespan of these kids going through elementary school, that would be about 450 more students. I'm not convinced that that's going to happen, but I'm also not convinced that that's not going to happen. And if we were to make a decision today to close a school and then those students did indeed arrive, we would be in a situation where then we would need to reopen a school that we just closed. So my recommendation is that we've got to consider if we're now catching a larger percentage of the kindergarten students that are living in Novato. If this is the beginning of a trend, it would significantly impact any decisions regarding school closure. And based on the best data that we have available to us and all the outcomes of the committee's recommendations, at this point, I do not recommend that we close the school. So that's a lot of information with a big finding at the end. So I'm open to any questions or comments.
Trustee Cooper and then Trustee Miller.
Thanks, Superintendent Koska. That's good news, I think.
Yeah.
I think many of our parents and teachers and students will be very happy to hear this. I do think in light of our next report, the first interim, that we still are operating at a structural deficit in this district and that we need to, excuse my voice, but we need to, because this is one of the cost-cutting options available to us, we need to continue to focus in on other opportunities.
Absolutely.
Trustee Miller?
Thanks for the report, and it's the key factor that I see driving your decision is you got 77 students more in the TK program than the year before, and if that lead cohort holds over time, where Novato is a different enrollment circumstance we had before. We've done cohort studies that try to noodle out that same number, and it hasn't been supported by the cohort studies, but those are real kids, and there's real revenue, and there's real mouths to feed that need real teachers to help them grow. So my concern about this is I was looking for a program that would look at adjusting our physical plant in a way that would help us save cost. What I've got in my hand is a recommendation for revenue increase. It talks about better marketing. It talks about attendance recovery. It talks about a partner program with College Marin. All of these programs this district is doing. it talks about go out for a parcel tax. That's a revenue model. So my concern is that the work we asked this committee to do, which is extremely hard work, they didn't do. They did something different. They did a revenue study, not a cost-cutting or consequence of cost-cutting or impact to neighborhood study or how do other districts pack their kids into elementary schools. Those are really painful questions. And so, while I support your recommendation, you're the one that's been looking at this and you're looking at the increased revenue. My concern is we have a structural deficit, and this board took the very painful decision to introduce to the community that we might have to close the school, and then the committee didn't do the work to either to address that issue. So I'm unhappy we didn't cover that requirement that I thought we clearly put on the table.
Yeah, so
I think this is good work, but this is not what I thought we were going to, that study, the hard work that I thought we were going to see.
Yeah, so.
I'm frustrated about it.
Yeah, no, I understand. So when we started the committee, I believe it was in October of 2018.
About a year ago, yeah.
That committee's charge was not to make a recommendation to close the school or to select a school to close.
Mm-hmm.
Their recommendation was to explore what the impacts would be of closing a school and if the negative impacts outweighed the positive impacts. And that was the charge we brought to the committee. And so if we brought the wrong charge to the committee, then that's on us.
Well, no, that's a good charge, but I don't see that answered here.
So actually their answer is here. It's on the, I believe it's the second page. On the actions taken page. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I don't believe I numbered it.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Right here on the February 2019 findings. So their findings were, they kind of split the difference a little bit. So in some ways, having smaller school sizes has a positive impact on instructional program and school culture. However, they also acknowledge that we're not running at the most efficient program that we can. So what they recommended is, and I'd say they maybe went a little rogue here, but I appreciate it.
Yeah.
They said, hey, these are some other things that you should do before you consider the draconian step of closing a school.
And I think that's a responsible answer, but I wish they had said, we've tabled the question you asked us.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm because I know it's a hard question. This district has had to ask that question multiple times. It's a very hard question.
And I think that if the student enrollment, if we tried all those things and the student enrollment continued to decline, I would probably be at the microphone tonight making a very different recommendation. I mean, so coming in as a new superintendent in July and thinking that one of the most daunting tasks that I was going to have to deal with this year was coming to this microphone and saying, hey, we're down another 150 kids. And I think we're going to have to close the school. That was not something that I was looking forward to. I did not expect this number to increase. And so, Ross, we changed a variable. And the question isn't, are there all of a sudden more kids in Novato? And so that's what the demographers look at.
Right, they go down to the hospital and count babies being born.
They look at the historical birth rate in Marin County, what percentage of those kids go to Novato, and then what percentage of those kids have historically enrolled in Novato's schools. Well, we changed a key variable. And I think we changed that key variable with our marketing plan. So the question is, are we capturing a larger percentage of those kids now than we used to? And the demographers report can't keep track with that because it's a new thing. Or it could just be a blip. That's the unknown.
Given my point is, this is one of the most daunting things as in your new job you're going to have to deal with.
Yep.
And I am willing, I accept your recommendation to us this evening. I just want to talk through this, and we're still running a deficit financially in this district. We still have that core issue. So I still think there's work that's gonna be done, and I'm waiting for the time when we have to re-ask for this study, and next time I don't expect it to take a whole year.
So
But,
in,
yeah.
in
Thank you.
February, we'll be bringing to you our budget reduction plan for the
Okay.
2021 school year.
Because that's really the meat and potatoes of the closing schools is, it drives dollars. Thank you very much for your time.
Trustee Mack?
Good stuff as always. So you touched on the demographers, obviously having their ability to kind of project birth rates and populations. And then they apply an assumed, effectively, penetration rate, whatever, number of those students ended up in our schools. And I guess it sounds like you implied they use a somewhat static number based on history.
They use historical trend data, yeah.
Right. I'd really like to see how that number changed this year. I know they don't have it yet, but sooner rather than later, because that's effectively the validation of Target River.
Could be.
Right, because that just didn't come out of thin air.
I agree.
Yeah. So anyway, if you could please, whenever you can, get that from those guys. I think that's the number we need to see, and maybe that's an upward trend. Maybe we are onto something. So
I do think, as people who deal in the world of big numbers, the demographers, they're going to struggle with 1 year's worth of data also. So, but it's buckle your seatbelts. Here we go.
Did you? No. Anybody else? Any more comment? Trustee Nell?
So I think we find ourselves, fortunate in the fact that the demographics are changing in our favor. I think it's important to respect the committee's recommendations. I think they were thorough and thoughtful, and the statement regarding positive impacts versus negative impacts is by far the most important thing we all need to consider. But the committee's charge was to come up with a school size, sort of an optimal school size concept. And I think we all know that when things are dispersed and spread out, that you end up with split level grades, combo classes, because you don't have the concentration needed to operate at a more efficient level. So you end up with more of this and that, and nobody really wins in that situation. So what I guess I'm relieved, sort of seen a lot of this coming. We've been following your steps towards the recommendations with the reports that have been coming out, and probably didn't anticipate a really high level, finding ourselves in a situation where we were going to have to close a school. Like you said, you would stand up there and go, down 100 kids, we're going to have to do this, because this is it's a very, very painful thing, and it's very, very difficult for the neighborhoods and the people attending the schools that would obviously be closed. So, but it's been mentioned before, structurally we're still running at a deficit. We've heard from some teachers tonight where we basically don't have the resources to spend in certain areas along the lines of split classes and over 155 contacts at high school. We decided we've got some other issues with apparently our resource teachers are also have more students than they should or shouldn't. I think we're going to get that verified one way or the other coming up. But I think when I look at your recommendations, so it's best is to you do not recommend a school closure. You're talking about today. Or are you saying, what, are we going to need some triggers, or we're going to look at the budget? So I guess what I'm saying, right now, I wouldn't recommend closing the school or setting out to plan on selecting which school and how we would go about it. I'm in agreement with you on that. I'm not necessarily happy with some of the things Trustee Miller talked about, that we really haven't been able to identify that optimal school size situation and how we can be more efficient from an operational perspective. So I think we don't necessarily, I don't like the term back burner, but I think we still need to be working on this from a long range perspective. I think there's, the easy ones are there are three things that I checked that admittedly we just really haven't been able to get a hold of. The Saturday academies, for credit recovery, which would give us, the tennis recovery rather, which would give us ADA. It's a little bit here, a little bit there, it's gonna add up. I think you're saying that we're gonna get to that because we're taking it on ourselves. We had some issues with the contractor on that one. Part of the solution was to do something with essentially real estate. And right now, we're not. It came forward, we don't really have an easy one there. But maybe we can think longer term on that basis, because I think idle assets aren't really doing us any good. If we're not putting our assets to work, we're losing, we're falling behind. I mean, there's a lot of talk about COLA and trying to survive the cost of living. Well, if your money's not working for you, you're falling behind. And we have a lot of real land assets that aren't doing anything for us that should be. And even if it were, the win-win on that for teacher housing is just exponential for us. So we definitely need to be doing something along those lines. And that is, when I see that recommendation about what do you do with this building, for me, it's more about what do we do about our land assets, putting to work. And then the rental option, I think that justifiably so, we just haven't really had the resources or the organization in place to do that. But I do think with the new facilities coming online and there's going to be more opportunities, we probably could get better organized around that. So let's say we're going to do these things. We're going to focus on that for now because we don't have to close the school. But I don't think that we can just rest on our laurels and say that's it. We don't have to worry about that anymore, unless we can come up with better ways to increase revenue and operate more efficiently. So I'm accepting the recommendation and hope that the feedback that you're getting is we still have work to do and that we won't ignore some of these other issues. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Trustee Nell. And just to add a little bit more to this, the board received a whole report back in February on almost all this information that we just got. And the board directed, and we continually directed throughout several meetings, we wanted to continue to look at this. This was a priority for us to continue to look at this. We didn't want to put closure to it. So now Superintendent Koska is bringing forward his recommendation, and I think you heard that it's something we still are keeping out there, but for right now, and I think at the time when we formed this committee, it was a school closure would not happen for 2 years, so I think we're probably might still be in that same time frame. I don't, who knows? We don't have no idea, but we have seen this information before. It's not brand new to us. All right, so we got some comment cards, requests. I have Irma Mannion, Katie Lynch, and Karen McCormish. Those are our 3 speakers on this item.
Sorry, I've lost my voice, I believe. So my name is Irma Mannion. I work at Loma Verde Elementary School, and I was on the school closure committee. And as Mr. Koska says, what was wonderful about the committee is there were representatives from all elementary schools, plus community representatives and some administrators. We did talk about school size. What is the ideal size? We looked at our comparable districts. What kind of schools did they have? Why were those districts chosen as our comparables? A lot of from what I recall, their numbers were like 565 students. But then you had to look at the campus. What did the campus look like? So we couldn't do anything with that, in my opinion. And so we talked about the different programs, and I feel that I was also previously on the school budget advisory committee. And having been there on that committee, we got to a point where, questions were asked, could you live with this decision? When a poll was taken, how many agree, disagree, not decided. I did not look around the room, but I believe that that there was going to be no possible way of consensus. And that is why then the group said, okay, so we do not want to recommend closing a school. Then that's where the group went rogue and said, let's look at ways to generate income. So, no, exactly, right. But it was because it was, you know, so that is where we came up with all these different ideas. So, and like I said, having been on the previous committee, I understood the value of consensus, because then we would have had to come then say, yes, we believe that a school should be closed, and then the more difficult part would be which school. And therein is where the community, yeah. So thank you very much.
Thank you for your service.
It's just good.
Katie Lynch?
Hi. This moves. Okay. I have a daughter at Rancho. She's a first grader. And I'm probably wrong about this. I'm hearing a lot about demographers and birth rates. And I'm going to share some anecdotal data. I'm a research psychologist, so we talk a lot about anecdotal data. But my daughter was born in San Francisco, and her 5 best friends were born in San Francisco. And I think when we think about economics and kind of recent rents and purchase prices, I'm not so shocked that we're seeing an increase in Novato in school enrollment, and I wouldn't be shocked to see it again. I was pretty surprised we saw a decrease last year. We moved 2 years ago. We started school. My entire neighborhood, Buchanan Street, is turning over. We have an aging population, including my father-in-law, who are moving, and we have new families coming in. We have a lot of babies born in San Francisco who can't stay there and who also can't live in Southern Marin. And so they're coming here. I think this is a great trend. We could take advantage of this with the marketing that the superintendent mentioned. But I wasn't that surprised to see the increase. And so I don't know how well Marin County birth rates reflect who's here. And I'm wondering if there's other data we can look at. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Can we go through the speakers
Yep,
first?
sure.
So I'm going to make my comments brief, but there's been a lot of studies recently when I do a lot of the research that I do on class size, whether it matters or it doesn't matter, because there's some conflicting data. There is, in elementary school, it is, class size does matter, but even with high schools, there's been a lot of, I don't know if you heard about Kansas City closing half of their high schools to save a lot of money, and it was a disaster. It was a very violent disaster, and there is a lot of research that states that the benefits of smaller schools, especially at the elementary level, creates a sense of community, a culture of caring, and it increases attendance. Because if kids right now can't get to school, and when we are in, especially the marginalized communities of people, the meetings, the SARBs and SARTs that we have with our students at Loma Verde are, do you have an alarm clock? And giving the students alarm clocks if they're old enough to walk to school. Because they might not be getting the support they need, or in the household, or the parents are already gone to work before the child has to go to school. So just take into consideration, it is a dollar issue, but also make sure you're doing a little bit of the research so that you don't bite yourself in the foot when you're trying to save money by losing attendance, because that'll make you lose the money.
Tim O'Connor?
Hi, everyone. My name's Tim O'Connor. I served on the school size committee as well. I just wanted to chime in with a few comments. My experience on the committee was that the way we looked at it, closing a school was the nuclear option. As a group, the consensus was that we didn't feel we'd really earned the right to go there yet, given that we saw so many other opportunities on the table that hadn't been explored. Not only revenue generation, but there's cost-cutting opportunities there as well. So before we felt like we'd earned the right to say yes or no, we should close a school, we felt that these other items should be given priority and examined first. The second issue which we struggled with was, it really is a much more complex issue than asking a simple question, what's the right school size, or whether or not we should close a school. I mean, when we were trying to evaluate whether or not it should happen, we didn't know how that would how a school would be closed, what the impact on the community would be, what attrition would be. You could quite easily, if you lose 50 kids, that offsets your savings right off the bat. So what I would suggest is if you do go and try to have this conversation again down the road, it's in a much more well-rounded format where all of that data is provided as opposed to just a comparative analysis against your peers or other groups. Final comment, thank you for continuing to work on this. Too many times studies happen, committees are formed, nothing really happens beyond the first conversation or two, so keep up the great work. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, and no other comments from the board. We'll,
One comment is interesting to hear my daughter moved from San Francisco to San Rafael. The same issue, it was affordable in San Rafael, but not affordable in San Francisco. So I don't know if we've measured that demographic. I know with the tech sector taking off, apartments can be $4,000 for 800 square feet. It's just, there's a good reason, a good economic reason to choose to live in Novato and take the bus to work, like I do.
I'll have Alan. You want to have you speak under this item? Alan Harris. We have one more comment.
I actually took a graduate level course in college titled Demographics. One of the principles that I was instructed upon was that you could not predict your outcome in terms of individuals, people, population, based upon the trends from a region. Demographics is based upon an analysis of the internal growth that you have, which is determined in the case of individuals by measures of fertility and fecundity in the different ethnic groups, racial groups if you want, within your base population. And it's my opinion that Novato is materially different from Marin County in terms of our composition. True, there may be in-migration caused by this very salient observation of one of the preceding speakers. But I think if we really want to know what our kindergarten projections are going to be down the road, we need to take a hard look and find somebody who can apply those principles to the population that we have, that we rely on for children to populate our schools. Thank you.
If I could add, I probably did a gross disservice to the community and to our demographers by oversimplifying how they do the numbers. I tried to do a very high level analysis of how they do this work. They're very good at what they do. It's very scientific. So like I said, my oversimplification of what they do is bringing on some other comments, and I want to acknowledge that. They do the best they can do. We're comfortable with the folks we work with. We changed a significant variable by going out and adding a marketing plan, while there's also 101 other variables at work that complicate this work. So I just want to acknowledge that.
Okay.
An additional point, neighborhoods were built, and we're still not to the point where we're through one full generation. The original buyers in the President's streets are now passing into the next phase of their life, and those houses are being reoccupied by new homeowners, and that whole neighborhood's going to transition. San Marin is going to happen 20 years from now, and after a while it gets smoothed out like in San Francisco, but I think in Novato that's still pretty lumpy. Mm-hmm. All the houses got occupied in 1950, the school was built, and we're at the end of that transition, and you're going to see a lot more baby carriages up and down Buchanan Street than you did 5 years ago or 10 years ago. And one way to project it is to just drive around and open your eyes.
All right, and just to, so, you know, we, at the beginning of the school year, we heard so many parents coming forward saying, what are you doing? What is happening? We need to know about our school. Don't close this school. Don't look at this school. But as a board, we wanted to continue to make sure we had done the work to make sure we had a thorough decision, and we gave that direction to staff, that our decision that staff brought forward, the recommendation, was going to be the right decision at the right time. And I think that's why this is being brought forward this evening, and to put some closure to this topic a little bit, to put some calmness in the community, obviously, and it's the right decision because we have all the data and information in front of us. So thank you for doing that, and we'll move forward from here, and all of our schools will remain open. All right, so let's move on to our discussion action items. This is the 2019-2020 first interim budget report, which we do every year at this time. It's required for us to have this presented and approved.
All right.
I like that you take a financial report and put children's faces on the cover.
That is one of the many nice touches that our wonderful Director of Business Services, Nancy Walker, does, and I appreciate her putting our students up front because obviously that is what we're in the business for.
Nancy gets it. I got that.
Yeah. Thank you, Trustee Millerick.
Anytime.
All right. With that, that's a great transition into at the thanks. Thank you to Nancy Walker and her whole business team. This is an incredible amount of work. I mean, you've seen the 250 so on pages of work, and there are spreadsheets and data behind every single one of those pages. And as someone who's done that work in the past, not nearly as well, I just wanted to say thank you, Nancy, for continuing to just knock it out of the park. All right, there's kind of three stories coming out of this first interim report. There's some positives, there's some negatives, and there's continues to be some unknowns. In terms of the positives, you heard it earlier tonight. Superintendent Koska noted this year, whether it's a blip or the start of a new trend, we did see an increase in enrollment this year for the first time in the last 5 years. That enrollment was across the span. There was a lot in the elementary, specifically in K, but there also was some at the middle school and the high school levels, focusing in southern Novato at San Jose and Novato High School for those two levels. Also, some good news that has already been heard, but just to reiterate, we did receive some one-time state revenue. The governor's original proposal did not have us receiving any of this one-time funding, but the final deal with the legislature and adopted state budget did include one-time revenues that I'll get into. In terms of the negatives, we continuing to see increases in our federally mandated special education costs. I'll get into some details of that. As well as some negative information in terms of the projections of COLA in the out years, which is the primary funding increases that we see year to year. In terms of the unknowns, I noted that whether it's a blip or hopefully the start of a new trend in terms of enrollment, but we're going to see. We're going to see next year whether we continue to be on the same path that we've been on for 5+ years, or if we're changing. The state budget. The governor puts out his first projection of the state budget January 10th. So at the end of January, the board will be hearing some updates on what the governor thinks there. As Superintendent Koska noted, whether the parcel tax measure is successful or not successful, we still will have cuts and budget balancing solutions that will come to this board in late February and likely March for approval. As well, they just noted there's obviously an interest in the unknown of whether the parcel tax measure that this board put on the March 3rd election will be successful or not. LCFF funding increases. Superintendent Koska noted the increase in enrollment. So it's almost a $1.3 million increase in LCFF. This also includes some number based on our non-public school population and our numbers of students placed in county programs. Also just a hair under 800,000 in terms of one-time unrestricted funding from the state based on our numbers of special education preschool students. As you might know, we are currently not funded by the state for our preschool students who we are required by law to educate, who have individualized education plans. In terms of unrestricted expenditures, they're in line with budget, but there's a little bit more to that in the story. We had additional staffing costs of approximately $400,000 in those new students that we come need to have additional teachers hired. So about $400,000 in additional staffing costs related to that, and that was offset by some other savings, included some health and welfare savings, and in a few other areas. The largest net increase that we saw from budget adoption to first interim was increases in costs in our special education program. Some of it is through some increased staffing that the district made, but it's primarily increases in non-public school costs and non-public agency costs. In terms of restricted, we have the carryover and deferred revenue. That's why there's a big jump here. But in terms of net impact, we're really only talking about the special education increases that I discussed earlier that impact the unrestricted side of the budget through additional required contributions. Same on the revenue, mostly related to deferred revenue and other restricted revenue, but no net impact to the general fund. Our projected deficit of approximately $2.8 million is primarily on the restricted side of the budget due to spending down of some restricted budgets, including Proposition 39, some lottery expenditures for new adoptions, and that sort of thing. One thing to note, though, in terms of the unrestricted side of that budget moving forward is those one-time revenues of about $800,000 are helping fund ongoing costs. In terms of our fund balance in the general fund is projected to be 8.4% at the end of 2019-20. If you include all unrestricted reserve, that's approximately 11% of our overall budget, which is down from 22% about 10 years ago. In terms of our structural deficit and the deficit spending, we still focus on the three main areas. Declining enrollment, even though we are up students this year, we are still down students even over 2 years ago, and over 5 years ago, we've continued to decline. So while we hope that increase in enrollment continues, we still are down significantly, and specifically at the elementary level, where we went down from over 3,600 students to the current level of about 3,100 students. We also have those state-mandated increases to pension costs and slowing increases to state funding, and I'll get into that as we look into our multi-year projection. In terms of what has this board done and staff over the last 2 years, the board has approved $4 million in budget balancing solutions, including $1.6 million in administrative cuts. And as I noted before, we will see additional recommendations for reductions coming in February or March. Nancy does a great job of putting all of her multi-year projection budget assumptions here, but I really do want to focus on a couple of areas. And the first is the projected COLA in the out years. So the Legislative Analyst Office put out their analysis of the state budget moving forward in November. And that included, I believe, 10 or 11 months of the calculation of COLA for the next year. So this isn't a basis on trend. This includes almost the entire year of data and just having a couple extra months. At budget adoption, this was 3%. And just to put that into perspective of what that means to our budget, that's about $1 million that just got potentially taken off the table at the state level. Even if they both say we funded COLA. If they funded COLA at 3% versus 1.8%, it's about $1 million more for Nevada Unified. So that is a significant increase. Also in 21-22, I did not put in the updated LAO's projection because that was not based on data. That was just based on their projection, and we'll be getting updated Department of Finance numbers in January. But their number for 2021-22 is also projected by the Legislative Analyst Office at under 2% for 2021-22. So you'll be getting an update on that number for second interim, and I do expect that number to go down. In terms of changes in enrollment, based on historical trends, we still are projecting a decline in enrollment. Hopefully, we've turned it around some with that marketing and some other factors. But until we've seen a trend of that, we're going to continue to use our demographer's report as the best information on that. And then also, when you look into our state mandated increases to our pension rates, the STRS rate is projected to increase 1.3% to 18.4% in 2020-21. And our PERS rate is projected to increase almost 3% to almost 23%. That STRS rate is in statute right now. The PERS rate at the mercy of the PERS board, but they've been pretty close on their numbers. In terms of multi-year projections, due to the declining enrollment and those three factors, we continue, and the removal of the one-time revenue in 1920, we project a $1.5 million deficit in 2020-21 and a little bit over $2 million in 2021-22. It's also important to note that the impacts of ongoing salary negotiations with both of our units are not included in here, so any additional funding will change these projections. In terms of projections of the multi-year fund balance, 2018-19, 12.2. It's important to note a little bit that includes some restricted balances. I noted that we're projected to spend down restricted balances this year. So unrestricted would be a little bit closer. But we are projected to go from about $9.4 million in 1920 to a little less than $6 million in 2021-2022. Next steps, looking at our structural deficits moving forward, we're going to have to make some cuts. We're going to see how the parcel tax measure does in that area. We're still going to see those increases, state mandated increases. Hopefully STRS is at the point next year where it's hit its highest point. But PERS projections still project to go up into the mid to high 20% into the next decade. And I think there's probably additional pressures on STRS given that they've decreased the projected investment rate in STRS, as well as the unfunded liability does continue to increase. In terms of next steps, when we go into just a couple of items to highlight. The governor is scheduled to give his proposal in January, by January 10th. That will come to the board in late January. In January, we also will see updated enrollment projections from our demographers. And then our budget development process gets into overdrive with Nancy Walker and her team starting in January up to the June budget adoption. With that, staff recommends the approval of the first interim budget with a positive certification, certifying that it can meet its financial obligations in the current and 2 subsequent years. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Trustee Miller.
So I'm looking at page 11. Is that right? No, yep. That page. Nope, I'm sorry.
Page or the slide?
I apologize. I'm looking at slide 9. And you said when we reviewed this slide that our current reserves are at 8.4% down at the bottom line.
Yep.
And then your comment to us was 10 years ago, our reserves were 22%.
Yeah, so
that's 1% per year, more or less. 10 years.
more or less.
More or less from 22 to 8, so from 20 to 10. So it's a 1% per year. And then I go to page 13. And we're at 9 now, and you're projecting it's going to drop to almost 6. So we're still doing the 1% per year decline rate.
Yeah, without action by this board, that is correct.
Yeah, okay, so we've been on a slide for 10 years. We're still on the slide. We just heard we're planning to increase revenue but not reduce the cost of running schools. So I appreciate the committee's recommendation, but I don't see where we are taking the steps to solve the problem. Thank you.
Any other comments? What's the dollar amount that we pull from the general fund for special ed?
Special education, I gotta go back and let me pull up that number. It's a little over 60%.
Contribution?
It's in the contributions tab. Let me pull it up real quick.
And is it in the unrestricted? Nancy would know.
It comes from the unrestricted side of the budget as contributions to several programs.
Oh, there's several in there. That was my
So that's it's
12 million is in there.
that's within the range, but it's a little less than that. Let me pull up Nancy does a great job of detailing out. It's a little bit over 60%, moving towards 70% of our total special education costs.
Okay. Yeah. So it continues to go up.
Yeah, my apologies.
No, it's all right.
So you could ask Nancy.
I know. I said Nancy would.
Nancy, come on over.
Phone a friend.
General fund contribution to special education.
The dollar amount right now, I believe it's.
To the cent.
Well, you would have asked me a couple hours ago.
That's all right. You can just give it to me later. I know it's a big number.
Yeah, it's pushing $10 million.
Yeah.
Special education is approximately 20% of our overall budget in the district, so about $17 million-ish, depending on how you count transportation and our contribution to the County Office of Education. Of that, somewhere in the 65% range is funded by a contribution from the general fund.
Okay. Thank you. That helps. All right. Anybody else? Otherwise, this is an action item. As you know, we get this every year.
I'll move approval of the second interim. Here's where we are.
Yeah.
A second.
Yes. We have one question from Trustee Gasson.
With the special ed, where do we fall along the lines with other schools? I mean, is that about the same as where people are pulling money from? I know that it's just not funded well, so I'm just curious, is there like
Absolutely. That's a great question. So our special education review last year looked at us versus our comparable school districts and versus statewide averages. When they looked at it, we're right in line with school districts across the state. This is not, special education is not a services. Well, there's a whole other side of the service issue from a finance standpoint. It's a funding issue. the state and federal government do not adequately fund special education costs. These are some of our students with the most needs, and the state and federal government have continually not met their obligation to fund those.
And actually, just to add on to that, aren't our special education isn't that number increasing too? I mean, we're getting more and more students.
We are. We're approximately 11% of our students receive special education services.
Thank you.
All right, so we have a first by trustee Millerick, a second by trustee Aguila. All right, Karen, come on up.
Hi, Karen McCormish, Loma Verde fifth grade teacher. The restricted expenses in the increase for the 1920, can I move your slides? Okay. Right here, I think.
Combined
Is this
general fund?
restricted? Thank you. Restricted isn't, my understanding is, I've never done educational funding, but I have done 504. I'm 501c3s, and there are similarities between restricted revenues and expenses for both organizations. So if you get money in for something, it has to go out for that reason. And there's a huge difference between the budgeted and the first interim and the restricted of almost $5 million. And it doesn't repeat itself in the 2021 or the 21-22, I think. It doesn't repeat itself. So that $5 million in excess in the first interim is that my concern is that that was money in the reserve that kind of never should have been in the reserve because it was marked restricted to begin with.
On the restricted side, it's segregated. So
It's in the fund balance.
it's in the fund balance.
Right. But if we're talking about the structural budget, meaning like the everyday operating or the month-to-month or year-to-year budget, then should that really be in there?
Well, yes, because in order to appropriate the dollars for the sites and the departments to spend, we have to push the money up in the budget. It can't sit there in the fund balance.
But technically, it was never part of the reserve to begin with. I mean, it was part of the reserve, but it was had to be spent for this purpose.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So my concern just is that there's a huge $5 million bubble coming out of this budget as restricted, and it's not technically it's not something that's being repeated in the following budget years. So if you're talking about the structural budget, then I think that we shouldn't have to worry about that $5 million and make sure it's coming from the right place. And then the other thing is that there are some items in the budget that look like I'm not understanding why some of the stuff didn't come out of the bond instead of out of the budget, such as equipment.
All right, do you want to?
Yeah, so this is the time of year after the books have been closed and our restricted programs end in one of two different ways. They're either considered fund balance programs, meaning that any unspent dollars go down to the fund balance. That includes Proposition $39, which is for energy efficiency projects throughout the district, which the board approved $1 million contract to do lighting and other things like that, very specific. So those would have ended in the ending fund balance. They're projected to spend this year, and then they're taken out in the out years. The other is, and why the expenditures increase is larger than the revenue increases, several of our programs are what's called deferred revenue programs. In those programs, and it's a kind of a silly accounting thing, but they're not considered earned until you've spent them. So any dollars that we've received in some federal programs and some state programs, at the end of the year, if they're unspent, they're deferred as revenue and pulled off the books and then projected to be, but those are one-time in and outs. There's no net impact on our budget of those programs. The only impact from the restricted side to the unrestricted side are two programs, special education and routine restricted maintenance. And so when we're looking at the budget. It's why I sometimes try not to focus on the restricted side of the budget. Any impact that has a net impact on our unrestricted side comes in through that contributions. So the contributions increased by 500,000 related to special education. All other changes in restricted balances were related to programs that fund themselves and don't have a net impact on the general fund. They have net impact on students and programs, but not on the unrestricted general fund.
Thank you. All right. So I have a first by trustee Millerick, a second by trustee Aguila. This is approve the 2019-2020 first interim budget report. All those in favor? 7-0. Thank you, Yancy and Nancy.
Debbie?
Yes,
One
trustee Millerick.
comment. We're talking about programs that are going to contribute 23% of somebody's salary, 23% additional to make up for their pension costs. This is paying pensions for people who have retired years ago, but the funds at the state level were not adequate. I don't know of any private company that takes your employment salary and then takes 23% or 25% of that and sets it aside. It's more like 4 or 5 or 8%. So we're working in something that is so different than public sector finance because of this, having to make up for mistakes that were made a decade ago. Trustee Nels brought this up over and over and over. It is just an unimaginable financial burden on the whole state, and we're suffering through it at this table.
All right. Moving on to item 15B.
All right. Well, I'm sure I'm not going to do this justice for Jonathan, but this item is for the approval of 2 new classified management job descriptions as part of the maintenance operations and transportation restructuring. At the December 3rd board meeting, this board took action to eliminate 4 classified supervisory positions as part of a maintenance operations and transportation restructuring. Those 4 positions are going to be replaced by 2 new classified management positions that you have in front of you, the operations manager and the transportation manager. So the job descriptions are attached, as well as the placement on the salary schedule. Overall, that MOT restructuring is projected to save approximately $100,000 per year. So this is the start of your budget reductions as we move into 2020, 2021. The operations manager will oversee the grounds, custodial, and facility use departments, and the transportation manager will oversee the transportation department and the mechanic, the yellow and white fleet mechanic department. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, trustee Aguila? Oh, okay.
Make a motion.
Just a quick question in terms of timing. So if we approve this tonight, hiring, I guess, is going to kind of go straight away, and effectively start dates for these new roles next month or 2?
We're looking for implementation in early February.
Okay.
To match the actions that the board took earlier this month. We're trying to line that up as closely as possible.
All right, so we have first by trustee
Second.
Aguila, second by trustee Cooper. All those in favor? 7-0. All right. Our last item of the evening is 15C.
Thanks for waiting, Jen.
And Jen. Alex.
Good to see you. I'm better, thank you. I'm good.
Hand it off here.
We want to start with a video tonight, something to get you excited about what we are. Oh, there it is.
10 o'clock. You better have, this better be an amazing video.
So that was the visual design work of our IT department, Cassandra Diaz. So I want to thank her. One of the things we've really highlighted with the development of Data Matters that I'm here to share tonight is using our internal resources. As you know, we cut a lot of our contracts, and we did so knowing that we had people in-house who would be able to support the needs and probably do it in a more effective way to meet the needs of our schools and our culture. And so this is an example of one of those things that we're excited about, and I think that it attributes a great deal to a lot of what you saw in our dashboard presentation tonight. So with that, I'm going to move on to our PowerPoint. All right. So you've seen us up here several times before giving an update on where we are with Data Matters, and it's been a little bit of time. And part of that is because Alex Perez, who is our current data systems supervisor, had a grant last year to really invest some time specific to the data that was required for the monitoring of our P3 grants. And so that funding allowed us to pull Alex out of his place and work solely on the development of a tool that wasn't going to just help Novato, but potentially has the power to support some of our neighbor school districts. And that was Data Matters. So we're here tonight for a couple of reasons. One is we want to give you an update of where it is. Second is we want to acknowledge what has transpired since Alex has moved back into his regular position, and then request that we put some more focus back on Data Matters so that we have the tools that we need to do the work that we talked about earlier this morning. So this is where we all started. You've seen this before. This is our real-time dashboard. The only real difference you're noticing here is that we've added quite a few more demographics by which the staff is able to break down their work. Keep in mind that depending on the user that you are, it depends on the dashboard you see. So when I log in, I see what you're looking at, which is the entire district. If I'm at a school site and I'm an administrator, I see the entire school. If I'm a classroom teacher, I see the demographics for my classrooms, or multiple if I have multiple grade levels and multiple classroom topics. One of the most exciting developments that we've had in the last year has been the A through G progress monitoring. This is a tool that we have not been able to find anyone who's able to do. And so to have this online monitoring where students and parents have a very visibly easy way to monitor, where am I? Filled in shoe print means I've done it, checked it off. Little slash marks means I'm in progress. Gray means I haven't started it yet, and you can see those bars of where they need to get. So A through G progress, and we'll be moving into graduation status as well. And the reason we have it printed here on his iPad is because you can now choose which platform, so it'll reformat itself to cell phone, to an iPad, to your computer screen, so that there's even higher level of ease for any community member who wants to be able to access their students' information. Long-term data assessment, this is where we started as well, similar to that dashboard. We've seen this before. The only difference you're going to notice is some of the graphics obviously have more long-range data, the more that we've been able to build it out. The attendance tab has really grown a great deal. When we identified that last year in our differentiated assistance, that suspension data and attendance were areas that we had some responsibility for working towards. Those were two areas of priority that have been built out, and we've actually been using this tool now monthly at our DLT meetings to monitor the progress. And it's the first time we've really had established and meaningful data cycles where we can come in month by month and we can do comparison data and actually analyze what's working and what's not. This is one of the more exciting ones. You'll notice that right now it's specific to elementary school. This is where we now teachers can enter their own data. So Mars tasks are included, running records are included. You'll see down here, this is a student. They are in November, they are at a reading level of an N. So we can show progress over time now with local assessments that are self-input or self-recorded by our staff members. The other is reclassification monitoring. This is another one that's really difficult for us to share because it's not an easy one to find in Aries if you don't know the queries or what you're looking for. This gives in one snapshot the overall reclassification monitoring that we would need when we come to a parent meeting, when we come to any kind of metric where we're deciding whether or not we're going to be reclassifying or not, and being able to explain why and what is our next step forward. So this brings us to where we are today and why I'm here before you. Last year, we had Alex full-time working on this, developing this, and he did an incredible job in a very short amount of time with some limited resources. During that time, he was able to go out to every single school. He was able, elementary school, train staff. He was able to work with administrators at the elementary and the secondary levels, but never was he able to get to secondary teachers because we hadn't built that out. If you look at the rates of logins, so for example, 85% of staff at Hamilton, 100% at Loma Verde, 94% at Lou Sutton, so on and so forth. You can see that there was usage when this was happening. Since then, it's primarily the administrators and the few teachers who are using it because they were able to have enough training. We haven't been able to give enough support to our staff to have the timely data, which is the goal of the program. And so what we see now, this is 2019-20, you can see how these numbers have diminished quite a bit. There are some schools that are still clearly using it quite a bit. But for the most part, that's independent use and because they have someone at that school who feels very comfortable with it. So what's our big idea? We can't improve a system we can't see, and I think that has come to us in so many different ways. We've had a number of audits over the last 3 years. We had our special ed audit, we've had our equity audit, we've had our FPM, our federal program monitoring. And one trend that we see over and over is we have some incredible services, we have incredible staff, we have incredible instructional strategies, but we don't have tools in place to monitor regularly progress for students. We don't have those growth measures. And so this is the tool to help us do that. And in a short amount of time, we saw some pretty significant difference in our dashboard with just the little bit that we had to start with. And so what we're hoping is to see that move forward. In addition, I think it's important to note that the rest of Marin County is very interested. So this also becomes a potential revenue builder for our district. We have 2 districts right now who we're going to start piloting, hopefully for them to start using it right away. Like us, they have been struggling to find a resource that can do what this does. And they would rather see a partnership with us than some of the other organizations we've worked with and shared their struggles with. So what's next? And you saw this on the video. We've now narrowed down our 3 goals and we're highly focused on our culture of caring, culture and competence, and culture of excellence. With that, we need metrics to be able to measure those things. And while our staff is working on the metrics, working on the PBE, working on MTSS, where are we going to put it? How are we going to make growth and learning visible? How are we going to be able to gauge whether the tools that we decide to use, whether the rubrics we decide to use are actually making a difference or not? We want to move away from let's try something, let's hope it works, and do the best we can to either fix it or remediate later on. We want to know what we're doing in a timely way. So just a quick list. Some of the things we're really wanting to focus on now is obviously we need to build our secondary pages, but all of our MTSS, so all of our at-risk student groups, monitoring the services. For example, what services are students getting? Are the services actually meeting the needs that the student needs? So making sure that we're pairing the right interventions and the right tools to the student's actual needs and being able to monitor whether or not they're working or not. So for the remainder of this year, what we are proposing, and we are asking your approval for this evening, is we have found grant funding to be able to divert some funds to allow for Alex Perez, our data system supervisor, to shift from the IT department to the educational services department for the remainder of this year. At the end of this year, we'll probably be coming back to you with a proposal for what does this look like long term. But what we've found now is another temporary way for us to move him into the educational services department, allow him to finish this project, or I shouldn't say that, focus on this project. We know that it's a long-term project. And we can do that temporarily for this year with grant funding that we've been able to divert other funds from. So tonight, what we're doing is asking your approval for us to take our data system supervisor, move him to Ed Services, and the funding will allow us to backfill his position so that we are no longer in need in our IT department as well. So questions?
Questions? Trustee Neal.
I just want to understand the funding. You're saying it's for the remainder of the school year.
The remainder of this school year, or the remainder of his contract this year.
So the dollar amount that's on the report of 86,672 is
That's the remaining. That would be from January 6th until the end of his contract on July 1st.
Okay. And then could you restate or talk a little bit more about what you think might be the way we would be able to continue to fund this position in educational
One of the things that we're talking about is in our parent advisory committees and our DLAC meetings and all of our parent group meetings around the LCAP process is to what extent are we looking to support the ongoing data management system. So as you guys know, we had a data management system. We've had them in the past. They have been less than successful. Large amounts of money have gone unused, to say the very least. And so being able to hold this in-house allows us to make sure that the system actually meets our needs. And so long-term, what we would be looking for is to add it into that LCAP, but that obviously has to do with the advisory groups. That's not a decision we'd be ready to make. So what we're working on now is how do we just get to the next step? Ideally, when it starts bringing in revenue, if we're able to get to that next step, it starts to pay for itself.
Trustee Miller.
So first, Cassandra Diaz does great work, and it's a testament to the Novato district in that she came here and basically created her own education path and grew herself into the kind of resource that makes this place a wonderful place. And that happens in a lot of places, including Alex, who is stepping forward and building his skills beyond what you can find in industry and finding solutions here ahead of everybody else. I'm thrilled that there's an opportunity for him to step over and focus on data, as you've pointed out before. We've spent an awful lot of money and had an awful lot of very blank reports that don't inform us to improve education. I think this is a good time to try again and hold ourselves to high standards and measure our own progress and see how we succeed. I think we have to keep trying at doing this, because if you look at the commercial world, self-monitoring system, self-correcting system, self-driving cars, the world is getting to the point where if you don't have data to make decisions, then you make bad decisions and you discover 6 months after you could have that you're on the wrong path. I think this is great, and I'm going to support it. I want to make sure in that process, we now have Tim Rocco's faced with having to get some rookie to backfill a veteran, and he's going to have to, he'll grumble about that, I'm sure, a little bit, but if we can pick the right person to fill the slot, maybe we can give somebody else an opportunity to demonstrate their abilities and grow. So I think it's a great idea. It's just obviously stress on the organization.
Yep. Thank you.
Trustee Gila?
Make a motion.
Let me do a comment. Mariah Fisher.
Thank you. I just have a couple of concerns. One question, I'm not sure if I can ask a question during my comment, but the supervisor title makes me feel like there's a group of people under the supervisor. So I was just curious how many people are below this position working under the supervisor. And then also, I just have concerns around, looking at the interim budget and hearing declining enrollment and deficit spending as very frequent reasons why teacher salary, we're still kind of battling about that, and then we're adding a supervisor role. So I have concerns about that. So thanks.
Okay, thank you. Do you want to, any comment regarding the title?
Yeah, and so one of the things with the title is we didn't want to make any permanent changes because we do need to have some more discussion around this, and this is really a temporary fix similar to what we did last year, in that we have some grant funding that's going to support us in doing this again. So at this point, the title is simply his same title. So we're just shifting him from one department to another. We don't want to move forward yet with any kind of position or title changes. As I stated, this is currently a temporary. This is to get secondary filled out and move forward with how can this look for maybe our MTSS and our interventions. And so in terms of the supervising role, it's the same number of people he was supervising last year. Where we really felt stress in the system last year is not being able to backfill the position. And the money that we have available to be able to use for this now will allow us to backfill his position so that we make sure that there is still someone who is maintaining the IT needs that there are.
Okay.
That answer it, yeah.
So I had a trustee Cooper. Yes.
It has to do with the other districts in Marin County. You mentioned that we're on the brink, it sounded like, of working with maybe
Miller Creek and Shoreline are
and
prepared to
what is
onboard
the, so in terms of what we get out of that relationship, could you talk about that?
That's part of why we want to try this. These are both smallish districts, and Alex I may invite him up to talk a little bit about what that requires. Part of the beauty of this platform is that it's almost like a parasite. It just latches onto what we already have. So the data itself is in Aries. It's pulling directly from our SIS. So as long as you have that SIS, it's an add-on to those. And so by starting with these two, and fortunate these are smaller districts, it allows us to see what does it take to be able to do that, and what would we need in return to give that time or effort to do so. Is it is it going to benefit us in some way? We know it's going to benefit them. So what do we need in return to make that worth it in our organization? And that's why we want to try and see how it goes. Yeah.
Yeah, so pretty much what we're doing with these two smaller districts is that we're going to test to see how much time it's going to take on our part of, or at least for my part, to invest with them to figure out what servers do they need, how much time is it going to take to set up these servers, how much time is it going to take to connect to these servers. So kind of start figuring out costs for all of these things and figuring out, okay, what's going to be a long-term support or short-term support, and how's that strategy going to look going forward. So pretty much all of this is we're trying smaller districts because it's going to be easier to support them at this time, and then seeing how can that be expanded with the larger districts like San Rafael. We've been going to several different community meetings and presenting what we have to them because they've been wanting to see it. So we started with the county, and then the county asked us to present with the Marin Community Foundation again and to expand to several other districts. So we've been to present to all the P3 superintendents, and the interest is there. It's just we want to see that we want to make sure that we have the capacity to be able to support them and figure out what those costs are going to be before we even go that far out.
And that's, being in the technology world, that's totally consistent. You want to roll out with the smaller customers who are ready to be partners in developing it. You don't want to go hit the big boy first and then everything breaks up. So there's a lot to be said for your approach. I totally agree with it. And then it allows us to have our act together when we go hit Mr. Hogaboom.
Yeah, we charge them extra.
Start having him write checks to us.
Yeah. Okay. This is an action item. Trustee Nell, you have a question?
Well, I'll
comment.
Let me make a quick comment. I support it for far too many reasons that we have time, that I have time to express at this late hour. I really think this is a good idea. what really bothers me the most, but I understand we don't have a choice, is that we don't have the ability to fund it for about 3 years on an ongoing basis. And I have to say, this is very unusual for me in the private sector world, where a day doesn't go by where someone doesn't solicit me to buy their management information system specifically built for my industry and the work that I do.
For you.
Yeah,
Built for you.
exactly. But for some reason in public education, we're having to do this ourselves. Now, and I think it's important to recognize that this is an offshoot of the Marine Community Foundation and its funding around the P3 work, which was a sincere attempt on their part to get a large bureaucratic organization like ours to make some systemic changes and to fund it ourselves and not be dependent on philanthropy, but to actually see the value that can come out of this. And because I think it's, in some way, we're actually going to try to do that. Makes me very happy, and I think eventually we will be very successful. The fact that you can sell subscriptions is even better, of course, but the concept is what we should be doing in the 21st century. So wish we could do more. I hope we will find a way to continue to fund it. So I will support it.
Okay. Would you like to make a motion? Okay. Okay. So I have a first by trustee Mack, a second by trustee Aguila. Let me just reiterate, the approval is approving and moving the data system supervisor to the Education Services Department beginning January 2nd, 2020, and filling the position they vacate in information technology. All those in favor? 7-0. Thanks, Alex.
Thank you.
Thank you. No doubt on that.
All right, that concludes our meeting this evening. Our next regular board meeting is in January at some point in time. I think it's the 14th, maybe? All right, this meeting's adjourned.